The name badge set HOUSEKEEPER in bold letters. My if is matter pressed into my chest visa smell that could code glass, and my wife Vanessa stood right there laughing like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. We were at the Sterling Hotel's Grand Ballroom, surrounded by 370 guests in designer clothes and practiced smiles, and it just been handed my role for the evening. Not as husband, not as family, as the help. Fats for family, Mason. Vanessa said, loud enough for the people around us to hear. You understand, don't you? I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I was staring at a stranger wearing a wife's face. You'd been married for 9 years, 9 years of building what I thought was a partnership, a life, something real. But standing there in that ballroom, watching her at my humanitarian, I understood that it'd been living in a story should return without my knowledge. There was no chair for me at the family table. He'd removed it while we were greeting guests. My seat, the one with my name card, had simply vanished. In its place was an empty space that might as well have been a statement carved in stone. I reached down and twisted my wedding ring off my finger. The gold band caught the light from the chandeliers overhead as I set it down on the white tablecloth, right in front of Vanessa and her mother Eleanor. The conversations around us stuttered to a stop like dominoes falling in rivers. What are you doing? Vanessa asked, her smile freezing in place. Leaving. I said. You wanted me gone from the stable. Consider it done, permanently. I walked out of that ballroom with 370 pairs of eyes burning into my back, and I didn't look back once. They thought he'd put me in my place, thought he'd finally shown me where I belonged in the hierarchy he'd constructed. They had no idea what I was about to do. My name is Mason Bradford, and this is the story of how my wife and her family tried to destroy me at their own celebration, and how I returned the favor without raising my voice once. Before we get into what's happened next, if you're enjoying the story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with toxic family dynamics, and smash that like button if you think people who humiliate others deserve what's coming to them. Now, let's continue. 9 years earlier, it met Vanessa Morrison at a community fundraiser in downtown Portland. I was 28, working as a project coordinator for a Massachusetts construction company, putting in 60-hour weeks and building a reputation as someone who could solve problems that made other people quit. Vanessa was 26, beautiful in that effortless way that made you think she'd never had to work for anything, which turned out to be closer to the truth than it realized. Her family was money, old money, the kind that came with country club memberships and vacation homes that had been in the family for generations. Her father, Robert, had built Morrison Development into one of the largest commercial real estate firms in the Pacific Northwest. Her mother, Eleanor, came from a banking family and treated social events like military operations that required perfect execution. I should have seen the warning signals during our engagement, the way Eleanor corrected how I held my fork at dinner, the casual comments about my work clothes when I showed up to family events in anything less than a suite, the subtle remarks when I tried to contribute to conversations about business or investments, like my opinions were background noise they were too polite to acknowledge directly. But I was in love with Vanessa, or at least with the version of her that existed when we were alone. She was warm, funny, made me feel like I was the most important person in whatever room we occupied. It wasn't until after the wedding that I started noticing how that warm disappeared the moment her family entered the picture. The first real incident happened 6 months into our marriage. We were at Sunday dinner at the Morrison Estate, their sprawling property in the West Hills with views that made you understand why people fought 2 hours over land. Eleanor was holding court at the head of the table discussing some charity gala she was organizing when I mentioned that my company had just won a major contract to renovate the downtown convention center. That's nice, Mason. Eleanor said without looking up from her wine. Vanessa, did you remember our recipe for the Anderson's anniversary party? It was like I hadn't spoken, like my words had been absorbed by the expensive wallpaper and forgotten. Vanessa didn't even glance my way, just launched into a discussion about gift ideas while I sat there wondering if anyone at the table had actually heard me. That became the pattern. Family gatherings where I was physically present but socially invisible. Conversations that float around me like I was a piece of furniture. Vanessa's gradual transformation from loving wife to someone who treated our marriage like a side project should lost interest in finishing. The real insidious part was how slightly happened. Small erosions so gradual you didn't notice you were standing on a cliff edge until you looked down and saw nothing but air. Vanessa started spending more time at her parents' house, started making major decisions about our life without consulting me first, started introducing me at social events as my husband Mason with a tone that suggested she was still surprised by that effect herself. I tried talking to her about it multiple times, suggested marriage counseling, proposed that we take a vacation, just the two of us, away from her family's influence. Each time, she agreed that we should work on things, promised to make changes, then slide right back into the same patterns within days.
You're too sensitive.
She'd say when I brought up how her family treated me. They don't mean anything by it. That's just how they are. But people don't dismiss and diminish you without meaning it. That's not something that happens accidentally. That's a choice, repeated over and over until it becomes the foundation of how they see you. The event that would become my breaking point started 3 months before that ballroom humiliation. Eleanor announced that the Morrison family would be hosting their annual charity gala at the Sterling Hotel, a massive fundraiser that attracted Portland's wealthy elite and raised hundreds of thousands for various causes. This year's theme was a night of elegance, and Eleanor had been planning it with the intensity of someone organizing a small military campaign. Of course you'll be there, Mason. Eleanor said during one of those Sunday dinners. It isn't a question. You need help managing the logistics. You're good with that sort of thing, aren't you? I should have said no right then, should have recognized the trap being set. But I wanted to prove something, wanted to show to Aram that I could contribute meaningfully to their world even if I hadn't been born into it. I'd be happy to help. I said. Vanessa squeezed my hand under the table, and I mistook it for support. Looking back, I realized she was probably just relieved that it agreed to it without resistance. The next 3 months were a masterclass in how wealthy families maintain their hierarchies. Eleanor assigned me tasks, sure, but they were all service-oriented, coordinating with vendors, confirming RSVPs, checking on delivery schedules. Important work, but the kind that kept me in the background while the Morrison family took center stage. I didn't complain. I did the work efficiently, solved the problems before they became crises, and thought I was earning respect through a competence. What I was actually doing was reinforcing their belief that my prepared role was as support staff for their showcase events. The morning of the gala, I woke up early and put on the two-head Vanessa had helped me pick out. Yet gone shopping together, one of the rare moments in recent months where she seemed genuinely engaged with me as a partner. The two fit perfectly, made me look like I belonged in the world her family inhabited. You look handsome, Vanessa said, adjusting my bow tie in our bedroom mirror. You look beautiful. I replied, and meant it. She was wearing a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair swept up to show off the diamond earrings her father had given her for her last birthday. For a moment, standing there together in our reflection, I thought maybe things could get better. Maybe this event would be a turning point, a chance to prove to her family that I was more than he'd given me credit for. I should have known better. We arrived at the Sterling Hotel 2 hours before the event started. The ballroom was already transformed, all crystal and silk, and strategic lighting that made everything look like a photograph from a luxury magazine. Eleanor was directing the final preparations like a general reviewing trapeze before battle.
But you're here.
She said without preamble. The name badges just arrived there. Can you help sort the RMBY table assignment? I spent the next hour organizing hundreds of small cards while the Morrison family fled around the ballroom greeting early arrivals and accepting compliments on the venue. Every so often, Vanessa would glance my way with an expression I couldn't quite read. Apologies. Embarrassed. It was going too quickly to decipher. That's when Eleanor approached me with that name badge in her hand.
Man,
She said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people who went here about to deliver a blow and call it a fever. We hit a small issue with the seating arrangements, had to make some last-minute changes. She pressed the badge against my chest, and I looked down to read it. HOUSEKEEPER. The word said there in capital letters, impossible to misinterpret. Around us, conversations were starting to fade as people noticed what was happening. Vanessa was standing 15 feet away, watching, not moving, not intervening, just watching. This has to be a mistake, I said, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my chest. No mistake, Eleanor replied with a smile that looked almost sympathetic if you didn't notice the calculation in her eyes. We needed someone to help coordinate with the hotel stay after night. You've been so helpful with the logistics, it seemed like a natural fit. Vanessa walked over 10, and for a split second, I thought she was going to defend me. Instead, she laughed. Actually laughed, like her mother had told a clever joke instead of publicly demoting her husband. That's for family, Mason, she said, projecting her voice just enough that nearby guests could hear. You understand, don't you? I looked at her, and something fundamental shifted inside me. This isn't a mistake. This isn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional humiliation delivered by my wife and her mother in front of hundreds of people who represented their social worth. The table where it expected to sit was visible from where we stood. My name card was gone, replaced by someone else's. Someone who belonged there. Someone worthy of sitting with the Morrison family. Had sworn everything crystallized with perfect brutal clarity. I wasn't Vanessa's partner. I was her project, their king's boy should brought into her family's world to prove something to herself. And now that the novelty had worn off, I was being reassigned to my proper station. I reached down and twisted my wedding ring off my finger. The movement was simple, mechanical, but it felt like breaking a chain I hadn't known was there. The gold band landed on the white tablecloth with a small sound that seemed to echo in the southern silence. What are you doing? Vanessa asked, her smile finally faltering. Leaving, I said. You wanted me gone from the stable. Consider it done, permanently. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't make a scene or deliver some dramatic speech. I just turned and walked towards the ballroom ahead, and my footsteps steady on the marble floor, while 370 guests watched in various states of shock and confusion. Behind me, I heard Eleanor say something to Vanessa in a sharp whisper, heard my wife nervously and say, "It's just being dramatic. I cool off and come back." But I wasn't going back. Not to that ballroom, not to that family, and not to a marriage that had been built on the foundation of my willingness to accept less than I deserved. I walked out of the Sterling Hotel and into the parking lot where my truck sat surrounded by BMWs and Mercedes. The contrast had never bothered me before. Now it felt like evidence of something I should have recognized years ago. I drove home to the house Vanessa and I had bought together. A modest bedroom in a decent neighborhood that her family had never quite approved of. Too small. Too ordinary. Too clearly a home purchased by someone who worked for a living rather than inheriting a trust fund. For the first time in 9 years, I looked around that house and saw it clearly. So how Vanessa's taste had gradually taken over. How her family's aesthetic had infected every room until nothing felt like mine anymore. The artwork on the walls was pieces Eleanor had picked out. The furniture was from stores Robert had business connections with. Even my home office had been reorganized to match Vanessa's vision of how a professional space should look. It'd been erased from my own life so gradually I hadn't even noticed it happening. I pulled out my laptop and started making lists. Not emotional lists, not reviewing fantasies, but practical assessments of my situation. Assets, debts, legal options, timeline for separation. I worked through the night, building a strategy for extraction with the same methodical approach to see for any complex project. By dawn, I had a plan. Vanessa came home around 2 часа in the morning, her footsteps unsteady on the stairs. I heard her pass outside my office door, but she didn't knock. Just stood there for a moment before walking to our bedroom. The next morning she found me in the kitchen already dressed for work. We need to talk about last night, she said, pouring coffee like this was just another morning disagreement yet smooth over this conversation. No, I replied. We don't. She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Mason, you embarrassed me in front of everyone. You can't just walk out of a charity gala like that. Watch me do it here again, I said, picking up my briefcase. I'm filling further hours this week. My attorney will contact yours. Vanessa's coffee mug stopped halfway to her mouth. You're not serious. I'm completely serious. If you spend 9 years being treated like an accessory to your family's narrative. Last night was just the final demonstration of something I should have recognized years ago.
This marriage is over. Mason, you're everything. Mom didn't mean anything by the name Bets. It was just a miscommunication.
I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the calculation in her eyes.
She wasn't sorry about what happened.
She was sorry it responded in a way that disrupted her comfortable narrative.
A miscommunication. I repeat it. Is that what you're calling it now? What else would it be? Intentional humiliation. Public demonstration of how your family views me.
Your endorsement of their assessment through your laughter and your silence.
Vanessa sat down her coffee mug with forced calm. You're being dramatic.
No, I said, heading toward the door.
I'm being clear.
For the first time in 9 years, I'm seeing the situation exactly as it is. And what I see is that I've been married to someone who values her family's approval more than her marriage vows.
I left her standing in our kitchen and went to work.
And my boss noticed immediately that something was different.
You okay, Bradford?
He asked, catching me in the hallway. Actually, I said, I'm better than I've been in years.
And I meant it.
The weight I'd been carrying, the constant effort of trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me, had lifted the moment I took off that ring. The divorce process was surprisingly swift once I made it clear I wanted nothing from Vanessa except a clean separation. I didn't fight for the house, didn't demand money, didn't see a right to claim any portion of her family's wealth. All I wanted was my freedom and my self-respect back. Vanessa and her family expected a fight, expected me to rage or plead or see a right to win my way back into their good graces. When I did none of those things, when I simply processed the paperwork with clinical efficiency, it seemed to confuse them more than any dramatic confrontation would have.
Eleanor called me twice. I didn't answer either time.
She left voicemails saying we should talk, that the family was concerned, that surely we could work this out.
I deleted both messages without listening to them completely.
Robert showed up at my office once, which is expensive suite and entitled Demian looking out of place in our practical construction company environment. My boss intercepted him before he reached my desk and politely but firmly escorted him out. Apparently, Robert had tried to explain that he was just checking on family, which prompted my boss to respond. From what Mason told me, you stopped treating him like family about 9 years ago.
The divorce was finalized 4 months after that night at the Sterling Hotel.
I signed the papers at my attorney's office, walked out into a Portland afternoon that felt lighter somehow, and realized I was genuinely happy for the first time since I couldn't remember when.
But the story doesn't end there.
Because while it extracted myself from the Morrison family's orbit, they weren't quite finished trying to control the narrative of my failure. 2 weeks after the divorce was final, Vanessa started a campaign of social media painting herself as the wrong party. Photos of our wedding with captions about broken promises.
Vague references to my inability to handle the pressures of our lifestyle.
Carefully worded implications that it abandoned our marriage over minor disagreements. Her friends rallied around her with comments expressing sympathy and support. The Morrison family's social circle closed ranks, spreading their version of events through Portland's upper-class network. I heard through mutual acquaintances that I was being portrayed as unstable, dramatic, unable to appreciate what it had.
For a while, I ignored it.
Let them tell whatever stories made them feel better about what had happened. I had more important things to focus on, like rebuilding a life that belonged entirely to me. But then, I got a call from a former client, a small business owner whose office renovation it managed 3 years earlier. It heard concerning things about my reliability and wanted to know if he should be worried about recommending me for future projects. That's when I realized the Morrison family's narrative wasn't just social gossip. It was beginning to affect my professional reputation, and my ability to earn a living in a city where they had significant influence. So I did something he'd been avoiding. I wrote out the full story of that night at the Sterling Hotel, every detail from the name badge to my office laughter to the missing chair at the family table. I posted it on social media with no embellishment, no dramatic flourishes, just a straightforward account of what had happened.
The response was immediate and overwhelming.
Within 24 hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. People it never met were commenting with their own stories of being humiliated by in-laws or spouses, of enduring social abuses that accumulated over years. The Morrison family's friends tried to defend Vanessa and Eleanor, but their explanations sounded exactly like what they were, excuses for inexcusable behavior. Local media picked up the story. A reporter from the Oregonian contacted me for an interview. I declined, having said everything I needed to say in that initial post. But the publicity was enough to shift the narrative completely. Suddenly, the Morrison family wasn't their own the party anymore. They were the wealthy elitists who humiliated a working class son-in-law for entertainment. Eleanor's charity work came under new scrutiny. People started questioning whether her philanthropy was genuine or just another way to maintain social status. Vanessa's social media presence, once full of supportive comments, turned hostile. People called out her behavior, demanded she address what she'd done, questioned how someone could live while their spouse was being publicly humiliated. The Morrison family went silent. No more vague social media posts. No more whisper campaigns throughout their social network. They simply retreated into their world of country clubs and exclusive events where they could pretend the rest of us didn't exist. I moved on. Got promoted at work. Started dating again. Carefully this time, with clear boundaries and honest communication about what I wanted from a relationship. Bought a small house that belonged entirely to me. Decorated exactly how I wanted. No one else's aesthetic influencing the space I lived in. A year after the divorce, I ran into Vanessa at a grocery store. We both froze for a moment. Tension approached with something that might have been nervousness in her eyes. "Mason," she said. "How have you been?" "Good," I replied honestly. "Really good, actually. I saw your promotion announcement on LinkedIn. Congratulations." "Thanks." She shifted her weight, clearly wanting to say something but struggling with the words. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever think about what happened? About us?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But mostly I think about what I learned from IT." "Which is?" "That some people will only respect you if you're willing to walk through when they don't." Vanessa looked like she wanted to respond, but it already moved past her, continuing down the aisle with my shopping cart and my reconstructed life. I never saw her again after that. Her true mutual connection that she eventually married someone from an approved wealthy family. He's the kind of wedding her mother had always dreamed of. Settled into the exact life she'd been raised to lead. Good for her. I meant that without bitterness or resentment. She'd found her place in the world she belonged to, and it found mine in a world where people were valued for who they were rather than what their last name could provide. The name badge that started everything. That HOUSEKEEPER label that Eleanor had pressed against my chest taught me something valuable. Sometimes the cruelest thing someone can do is show you exactly how they see you. But once you know that truth, you can make an informed decision about whether you want to remain in their line of sight. I chose to step out of that vision entirely. And in doing so, I discovered that the life I'd been trying to fit into wasn't worth the cost of admission. That night at the Sterling Hotel, when I set my wedding ring down on that white tablecloth and walked through from 370 case, I didn't destroy Vanessa's world. I just removed myself from it. The destruction that followed, the social media backlash and the damaged reputations and the quiet retreat from public scrutiny, that was all their own doing. They thought they were putting me in my place. Instead, they showed me exactly where my place wasn't. And sometimes, that's the greatest gift someone can give you, even when they never intended it as anything but cruelty. My name is Mason Bradford. I was married to a woman who valued her princess over integrity, who chose her family's approval over our marriage vows, who lived while life was publicly humiliated because that was easier than standing up for what was right. And I walked through from all of it with nothing but my self-respect and my freedom, which turned out to be the only things that actually mattered. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from people who didn't value you? How did you rebuild after that decision? Let's talk about it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when the people who should support you choose not to. Thanks for watching. Or